I used to believe Rome was the center of the world. Golden roofs, marble gods, voices that echoed like thunder. But I was small, and no one listens to a small voice in a city built on conquest. My name wasn't Sporus. Not yet. That name would come later, when I had no choice. Back then, I had a mother. She sold olives in the Forum, under the shadow of the Senate House. She told me stories of the old kings, before the emperors, before the cruelty became normal. She said a man could lose everything and still die with dignity, if he chose how to go. I don't remember her face clearly anymore, just her voice, her hands, her shadow beside mine in the dust. I was 13 the first time a Roman noble stared too long at me. I didn't know what it meant, but my mother did. She stopped talking. She stopped smiling. She sent me to stay with an aunt outside the city, near the salt marshes. I didn't want to go, but I did. That's where the men came. They didn't knock. They wore red cloaks and carried scrolls with wax seals. They told my aunt I was being summoned to serve in the palace, a special role, a great honor. My aunt tried to protest, but she couldn't read, and neither could I. They said the order came from the emperor himself. They didn't say why. They just took me. I didn't cry, not then. The palace wasn't what I imagined. It was cold, quiet. Everything smelled like metal and oil lamps. The men who walked the marble halls didn't speak unless commanded. They looked away when I passed. The first few nights, I slept on a cot in a chamber with no windows. A servant brought me food and water, and nothing else. I asked questions. No one answered. I was just a boy with soft features and frightened eyes. Then one night, I was summoned. 2 guards led me through a corridor lit with purple flames. I didn't know they made torches like that. My legs shook the whole way. They brought me to a chamber with velvet curtains and gold statues of naked gods. That's where I saw him, Nero. He was sitting on a couch, barefoot, holding a lyre. He looked younger than I imagined, and more tired. His eyes didn't blink much. He stared at me like I was a painting. Then he smiled. I didn't know what to say. He asked me my name. I told him. He said, "Not anymore." Then he gave me a ring. It was too big for my hand, but I put it on anyway. If you're enjoying this video, like and subscribe to the Grimveil channel for more dark dives you won't forget. That's when I understood. I wasn't being trained. I was being claimed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of wind in the atrium. Something had broken inside me, but I didn't know how to mourn it. I thought of my mother, of the stories she told me, of how a man could still choose his end. But I was no longer a man. I wasn't even allowed to be a boy. I was becoming something else, something softer, something easier to control. And he hadn't even touched me yet. The next time he summoned me, I was brought in clean and perfumed. I didn't know why, but the servants did. They avoided my eyes. They moved slower, softer, like they were preparing me for something delicate or dangerous. The chamber was different that night. Warmer, brighter, incense in the air, music somewhere in the distance. I remember the feeling of the silk robe brushing against my skin as I walked in. I remember him watching me. I remember the way he said my name, or what he thought was my name. Sporus. He said it like a prayer, or a spell. I stood still. I didn't know what to do. He laughed and told me not to be afraid. Then he took my hand. He said I reminded him of her, of Poppaea. I didn't know who that was yet, but I would learn. He told me I was beautiful, that the gods had made a mistake, that I should have been born different, that I should have been hers, and now I would be. His words felt like honey and poison at the same time. He was gentle and terrifying. That night, he didn't touch me. Not yet. He just spoke, sang, told me stories about power, about fate, about the stars. I listened because I had no choice, and because I was afraid of silence. When I returned to my chamber, the cot was gone. In its place was a soft bed, silk sheets, a carved wooden box with a comb, oils and jewelry. My old clothes were gone. My old name was gone. I understood. I belonged to him now. Not as a servant, not as a concubine, but as something stranger, something in between. Days passed, or maybe weeks. I wasn't allowed outside. I wasn't allowed to speak to anyone without permission. I was taught how to walk slowly, how to tilt my head, how to smile without showing too much of my teeth. I was told to be still when spoken to, and radiant when watched. They trained me like a doll, but I was still a boy. My voice cracked sometimes. My legs were too long for the robes they gave me. I began to understand what was coming. I tried not to think about it. Then one morning, a man came with a blade. He said nothing, just looked at me and waited. I didn't run. There was nowhere to run. I asked if it would hurt. He didn't answer. 2 guards held my arms. I remember the cold. I remember the pressure. I remember the scream. And then, I don't remember anything. I woke up in a pool of blood. My legs were shaking. My throat was dry. I couldn't move. I didn't know where I was. I thought maybe I was dead, but I wasn't. I had been changed, remade, hollowed out. I cried then, not because of the pain, but because I realized the boy I had been was gone, and no one would mourn him, not even me. When they dressed me again, the robe was tighter, more delicate, pearls sewn into the sleeves. I was shown a mirror. My face was pale, my lips trembling, my eyes empty, and yet they said I looked perfect. They said Nero would be pleased enough to marry me. They called it a wedding. They dressed me in gold, not just silk, but metal threads, woven so tight they cut into my skin. I was bathed in milk, perfumed with crushed lilies, and dusted with powder to make my face pale. They pinned jewels into my hair until my scalp burned, and they told me to smile. I didn't, but I didn't resist either. I was too tired, too hollow, too broken to disobey. They said it was to honor Poppaea. They said Nero wanted to restore her soul by giving her a new body, and that body was me. I had never seen so many people in one place. Senators, generals, poets, priests, all gathered to watch a lie become law. They stood in silence as he took my hand and placed a ring on it. They watched as I bowed my head and let him call me bride. No one spoke. No one protested. Not even the gods. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the marble and become dust. Instead, I smiled, just enough to please him, not enough to betray myself. When it was over, they feasted. I wasn't allowed to eat. I sat beside him while he drank and laughed and played his lyre, pretending nothing was wrong, pretending I was happy, pretending I was her. I remember one senator's wife staring at me for too long. I met her eyes once, and she looked away, ashamed or afraid. I'll never know. That night I was taken to a new chamber, larger, softer, candles everywhere, petals on the bed. He came in humming, said I looked just like her, asked me to sing. I didn't know how. He said it didn't matter, that I only needed to exist and be quiet. He kissed my shoulder, my neck, my mouth. I didn't move. I didn't resist. I disappeared. I went somewhere else in my mind, somewhere far away, where my name still belonged to me, and my body was still mine. I don't remember everything that happened. I just remember the ceiling spinning, and the sound of his breathing, and how cold I felt when he left me alone in the dark. I curled up like a child and shook, but no tears came. There were no tears left. I had been erased, rewritten, recast in the shape of a ghost he couldn't let go. I wasn't Sporus. I wasn't her. I was something worse, something that existed only because she didn't. And from that night on, I stopped asking who I was, and started asking how long I would survive. After the wedding, the world didn't stop. It just got stranger. I was moved deeper into the palace, into the private wing where light barely reached. The servants bowed when they passed me, not out of respect, but because they didn't want to see me. I became a fixture, like a statue or a ghost. Nero summoned me when he was bored, when his new singers failed to amuse him, when the blood in the arena didn't excite him anymore. I was his comfort, his memory, his illusion. Sometimes he would sit beside me and play the lyre, whispering lines of poetry in a voice too soft to be sane. Sometimes he would dress me himself, wrap pearls around my neck, place flowers in my hair, say the name Poppaea over and over until it lost all meaning. Other times he would rage, throw goblets at the wall, shout that she was still dead, that I wasn't enough, that the gods were mocking him. And I would sit there, motionless, letting the madness pass through me like wind through a window. I learned not to flinch. I learned not to speak unless asked. I learned how to survive in a place where identity was a wound you weren't allowed to touch. I wasn't allowed visitors, not even the other slaves. I had no friends, no mirror, no name that felt real. Sometimes I would trace my old name in the dust with my finger, but even that started to feel like betrayal. The only time I saw the sky was during public events, when Nero paraded me like a trophy. He would bring me to the theater dressed in ivory robes, veiled like a bride, kissed on the forehead in front of cheering crowds. They laughed, they clapped, they called me Empress, but their eyes said something else, something crueler, something worse than hate, pity. I hated that most of all. I would rather they spit on me than look at me like that, like a living tragedy, like a pretty lie everyone agreed to tell. And I played my part. I smiled. I bowed. I stood one step behind him like a good wife. Even when he burned half the city and blamed the Christians, even when he executed senators for dreaming too loudly. Even when the empire began to rot from the inside and everyone pretended it smelled like roses. I stood beside him, the perfect illusion. And all the while I kept wondering, how long before he got tired of the fantasy he built from my broken pieces? How long before I became inconvenient? How long before the name Sporus disappeared like the one before it? Not with screams, but with silence. I thought he would live forever. Men like Nero don't die. They vanish. They fade into marble and myth. But something had shifted. I could feel it in the way the guards looked at him, in the way senators whispered behind fans. The empire was cracking. Grain shipments delayed, riots in the streets, generals refusing orders, and Nero still played his lyre, still held me at night like a talisman against the dark. He was losing control, and everyone knew it but him. He still called me Poppaea, even when his hands trembled, even when his voice cracked. He would hold my face and whisper that I was eternal, that as long as I stayed with him, nothing could touch us. I nodded. I smiled. I did what I always did, and I waited. Waited for the moment the fantasy would shatter. It came quietly. Word reached us that the Senate had declared him an enemy of Rome, that the Praetorian Guard had turned, that even the gods were silent now. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He simply stared into the fire and whispered, "They will take you from me." And that was the only time I saw him afraid, truly afraid, not for himself, but for the ghost he had built out of me. We fled the palace at night, disguised in cloaks, hiding like criminals. I was barefoot. I remember the stones cutting into my feet as we walked along back roads and empty fields. He still held my hand, like a child, like a lost boy. We stayed in a villa outside the city, once his, now abandoned. The walls were crumbling, the mosaics cracked, and there he decided it would end. Not in chains, not before a crowd, but by his own hand. Only he couldn't do it. He begged his servant to help. And in those final moments I stood there, watching, as the man who had stolen my body, my name, my voice, finally lost his own. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just watched him bleed. And when he fell, I stepped outside and looked at the sky. It was morning. The birds were singing. I was free, and I had no idea what that meant. They didn't know what to do with me after he died. The senators fought over his estates, his jewels, his statues, but no one claimed me. I was a shadow that didn't belong to anyone anymore. Too strange to pity, too dangerous to acknowledge. A living reminder of what he'd done. Some thought I might kill myself. Others hoped I would. Instead, I lingered. I wandered the palace until they told me to leave. I had no home, no coin, no name that opened doors. I returned to the places I remembered. The forum, the baths, the gardens where I once played as a child. But nothing welcomed me. Even the wind felt colder. I tried to live as a servant again, but no one would take me. Too many knew what I had been. Too many whispered when I passed. Sporus, the bride of Nero. Sporus, the eunuch who wore a crown. Sporus, the boy who let himself be broken for power. But there had been no power, Only survival. Only silence. Only the quiet scream I had swallowed for years. Sometimes I wondered what I looked like to them. A joke. A warning. A punishment. I sold jewelry to buy food. I cut my hair to look ordinary. But nothing could undo what I had become. Then one day, a new emperor rose, Otho, and he sent for me. Said he wanted to protect me. Said Nero had been a friend. I didn't believe him, but I had nowhere else to go. So I went, and for a time, I was safe again. Not loved, not free, but safe. Kept like a pet, like an heirloom too strange to discard. I knew it wouldn't last. Emperors never do. Otho fell. Others followed. Blood filled the streets again. And I was passed from hand to hand like a cursed coin, each one hoping I would vanish. And still, I lived. In the end, I belonged to no one. The empire moved on. New names, new tyrants, new parades, and I was a ghost trailing behind them all. The streets I once walked in silk and gold, I now walked in sandals and dust. No one bowed, no one looked, but they still whispered. I lived in a borrowed room above a butcher's shop. I ate what I could. I stayed out of sight. I watched Rome from the shadows, the same city that crowned me and carved me, now pretending I never existed. Sometimes I wondered if I had imagined it. The palace, the wedding, the name they gave me. Sometimes I told myself I had. It was easier than remembering. I was still young, but I felt ancient. Too tired to hate, too wounded to hope. I never tried to reclaim what they took from me. It wouldn't have mattered. My voice had been stolen long ago, and the silence had become familiar. The last man who kept me, a former guard of Nero's, said he loved me. But he didn't. He loved the story, the myth, the cruel poetry of what I had been. And when he grew afraid the Senate might come for him too, he let me go. By force, with fists, with fear. I didn't resist. I just disappeared. Again. They say I died not long after. Some say I starved. Some say I ended it myself. I don't remember which is true. Maybe all of it. Maybe none. I only remember the weight of the veil, the silence of the chamber, the ring on my finger that was too large for my hand. I was never a wife, never a man, never a child for long. Just a mirror, a reflection of someone else's loss. And when they were finished with me, they buried the mirror too. But I was real. I breathed. I bled. I begged the gods to give me back my name. And they answered, with silence.